Okay, our next guest is Alex Stein. He is a comedian and the host of Primetime with Alex Stein on the Blaze Media Network. He's known for some pretty interesting and funny public encounters on YouTube. And of course, he has no problem questioning publicly Building 7, which makes him A-OK in my book. Alex, welcome to the 24th hour.
Well, thank you for having me. But, I don't just question Tower 7. I mean, I question the whole entire event. And then obviously the war in the Middle East. I mean, I question it all very publicly and very openly because it's something I'm very passionate about. Because I remember when 9/11 happened and seeing my dad, I can just remember it like it was yesterday. And I saw him cry. And it was one of the first times
Mm.
I ever saw my dad cry. He took me out of school. And I just remember being like, wait, why is my dad so scared? And ever since then, it took me about 10, probably 20 years after that or 15 years after I was in freshman year of high school to start realizing it was an inside job. But it was always something that was really traumatic to me the day it happened, and a lot of other people, obviously.
Well, what I like though is there's not a lot of people with a following like yours who are willing to openly question it. I mean, I've heard stories from activists in our movement who will talk to somebody. Probably not a favorite name of yours, but Rachel Maddow. They talked to her on some cruise. And according to them, this is all kind of secondhand, but she said, oh, we know about it, but we can't talk about it. And then she goes on her show and blasts 9/11 truth. So it's sort of like there's these people out there in the media. We hear these stories who know about this issue, and they say, at least when they're talking privately, that they'd like to say more about it. But you actually go out and say it. You say it pretty unapologetically. Has this had any repercussions? Have you suffered any repercussions for this other than being called a conspiracy theorist on Wikipedia?
Yeah, I mean, on Wikipedia, they call me a conspiracy theorist, but I believe a lot of other, even way crazier conspiracies than 9/11, if I'm just being real, because I think the whole world we live in is basically a lie. But, I actually asked my biological stepfather, Tucker Carlson, if 9/11 was an inside job, and he changed his tune. He did think that something was funny about the official story, considering that if you just ask a person, forget about talking to mainstream people. If you ask a person like Tucker Carlson, when all this happened 15 years ago, he would make fun of 9/11 truthers. He even said that. And now he's changing his tune because he's looked into it. And like you said with the media, there's a certain narrative that you have to abide by when you are on the mainstream media. So that's why we're never going to get the real news from the mainstream media. And whether you like Donald Trump or not, I'm saying the same media that said that Hillary Clinton had a 99% chance to win when she ended up losing in 2016. So I'm just saying the media just lies right to our face. There's countless of other examples. But for me, the reason why I talk about it unapologetically is because this is the official story. And this is when I get in debates, people, I've done a lot of debates. The official story is that George Bush and Condoleezza Rice were both briefed that there was a guy in Afghanistan in a cave that had a plan to fly planes into buildings. That was the official story. You know that, I know that. And they just say that, oh, well, it was just, we just didn't do enough. We didn't have the proper knowledge. We just didn't, allocate the resources properly enough to stop it. Which that's if you know the official story. Without getting into conspiracy about Tower 7, Larry Silverstein, insurance, George Bush, Marvin Bush running security for the building. Before you get into any conspiracies, just the official story doesn't pass the smell test, because I believe if you were briefed by the FBI and it still happened, that means you let it happen. So if I'm just arguing, I'm steel manning your argument, that means that they were warned and they let it happen. That's the official story. If you really just break it down to the nuts and bolts of it, is that they were warned and they, oopsie, poopsie, we just didn't do anything. And then after that, you know what? We're going to go extra hard, and then we're going to do the Patriot Act. And we're going to have warrantless search and seizures of all of your emails, your phone records. We're basically going to take away the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. You're not going to have any privacy from the government anymore. So they had the plan for the Patriot Act. They had it written before 9/11. That's his official. I'm just talking about official stories right now. The Patriot Act was a plan that they wanted to get in before that. There's a thing called the PNAC, Project for a New American Century, which both sides, Joe Biden was one of the signatures on this bill, or whatever it was, this plan, because I don't think it was an actual bill. But my point is, they had a plan to go to the Middle East and take out what they called their 8 biggest threats. Iraq, Iran, all of the countries, Afghanistan, all of the countries that we thought were a threat. Well, if you look at problem, reaction, solution, the solution was to go start a never-ending war and help the banks and help the military-industrial complex. They had to do something. They had to create a problem that created such a reaction that we would be okay with going and killing innocent Muslims from a country that had nothing to do with this terror attack. These terrorists were from Saudi Arabia. They weren't from Afghanistan. So, and if you guys are really thinking, and I'm just talking official story before we go into the conspiracies, if you really think that 19 guys armed with box cutters were able to defeat the biggest military in the industrialized world of all time, the biggest military, then you are smoking the same crack as Hunter Biden, because it doesn't make sense. These planes could have been shot down in 2 seconds, a lot like what happened in Shanksville. And if you just ask a person that even doesn't believe it's a conspiracy, they'll tell you, "Oh, I think it was probably shot down," but they had to lie to us. So that's called cognitive dissonance, when you know that the government will lie to you, but you don't think that they lied about this particular incident. And that's why I speak unapologetically about it, because even a normal person from the official story, it basically admits that they just let this happen and it was all just an oopsie poopsie accident.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it for years, and it's beyond. I mean, we don't even say we think it was a controlled demolition here at AE. We've got the evidence to prove this. People watch Tower 7 come down. You intuitively know. You don't have to have any kind of engineering background to say that fire, which is an organic process, can't cause that to happen. Steel frame structure just collapsing in a 6.5 seconds and no time. And, speaking of all the intelligence failures, which, we talk about sometimes on my podcast, but AE focuses on the science. But I listened to a clip of Bill Cooper, who died shortly after 9/11. This is probably from, I don't know, the summer before 9/11. And he's talking about how CNN interviews Osama bin Laden. Supposedly, this guy is responsible for all these horrible terrorist attacks. He's like the #1 wanted guy by the U.S. government, maybe Israel's. Nobody can find him, but CNN marches into a cave and does an interview with him. And, again, the whole intelligence apparatus of the world can't find this guy. I don't buy it. And then supposedly he's killed in 2011. Big excitement comes across the entire screen. We got Osama bin Laden. And then before there can be any kind of independent verification, they say, "Oh, we tossed the body into the ocean." Right? Because apparently that's something in line with Islamic tradition, even though I've never heard of that before. Apparently Islam and pirates are the same thing. And even the news lady on ABC News, when I was watching this, you could tell she didn't believe it. She said, "Oh, the conspiracy theorists are going to have a heyday with that one." And yeah, we did, because, it just seems like it's just wrapping up a narrative for us. You talk about the media and what goes on. I know you've talked to Tucker Carlson. We actually wrote an article about it when he was on your show and talked about World Trade Center 7. From your knowledge, I always wonder, I'm still an outsider. I just see him on the TV and can kind of draw some conclusions, some guesses on what goes on. From your knowledge, what goes on behind the scenes? What are they specifically told in terms of stay away from this, stay away from that? Do you have any insider input you can give our audience?
I do have a little insider input, and from my opinion and the questions that I've asked, is a lot of it is unwritten and untold. You just kind of know how to toe the line, because you understand who your boss is, you understand what the narrative is, and you don't even necessarily have to be told. You kind of know that, oops, if I cross the line, like Jesse Waters, whatever you think about Jesse Waters, he got in trouble because he said that he just got in trouble because he was just talking extemporaneously, saying that generals are going to, I guess, take advantage of Kamala in the war room. And they try to say that it was some sort of sexual connotation. My point is, you have no freedom of speech. So they have to be extra, extra careful. So that's why they don't talk about conspiracies. But I want to go back, forget about the media. We know that they're controlled. But I do want to go back to Osama bin Laden, because I think he's very important in all this. What people don't realize is you can go watch a movie called Charlie Wilson's War, and that's about how we funded the Mujahideen and basically gave them weapons to defeat Russia in Afghanistan. And those same weapons were turned against us shortly thereafter when we invaded the Middle East. And what frustrates me about that is that we created ISIS, we created Al-Qaeda, we created the Taliban by basically arming these Afghanis with these weapons and training them on how to defeat Russia. So Tim Osman was a CIA asset, Osama bin Laden, who had a lot of connections to American foreign intelligence. So it's just BS that if you think it's just some random guy in a cave. And that's what frustrates me, is that people don't even realize that we created the problem that is in the Middle East that we fought. We were fighting against people that we gave them their own weapons to shoot against us. It doesn't even make sense. So it just really frustrates me when you look at the story of Osama bin Laden. And, another thing I mentioned earlier, I forgot to mention, when it comes to these planes hitting these buildings, NORAD can scramble a jet in about 30 seconds. So as soon as these planes said, hey, we are being taken over, as soon as they get on that transmitter and they say, flight 93 or whatever the flight is, and they say that we're in control of it, they would have a jet scrambled up there in 30 seconds. If you go now, you can watch air traffic control videos on Instagram of people that have little planes and they fly over protected airspace. NORAD's on them in a second. And these people are like, oh, I didn't realize I was in restricted airspace. They purposely let this happen because what people don't realize is that the Twin Towers, and I'm sure Tower 7, but I know for a fact Twin Towers, they had irreparable asbestos in the towers. And that is why the MTA had sold it to Larry Silverstein for so cheap, because they knew that it would be like I think it was like an estimated $1 billion charge to actually get rid of the cancer-causing asbestos that was the proper protocol when they built the tower, when it broke ground in 1969. So, or is it 1979? It was 69, right?
It was the early 70s. So
yeah, it broke ground though in 1960. That I know. I think it wasn't completed till like 72 or something like that. But my point is, in this, late 60s, early 70s, you could use asbestos. So that building, also the Twin Towers, both buildings were not wired for high-speed internet. So these were huge, massive buildings that weren't technologically advanced for modern day. So one way or another, these towers had to go down. And a lot of people do not realize that. And that's why in Vegas right now, they're tearing down the Tropicana Hotel. And a lot of people are like, why aren't they going to implode that? Well, the rumor is, the conspiracy is that hotel is filled with cancer-causing asbestos, and they don't want to implode it and get all of those particles in the air. So it's a very serious problem. Asbestos is known to cause cancer. And if you have a building that is millions of miles of sprayed insulation of asbestos, or whatever it was, thousands of, however they compute how much asbestos, it had irreparable asbestos. So whether they like it or not, those towers had to come down.
That's right. And then the EPA told people it was safe to go out, go shopping, all of this stuff. All these people now have cancer.
That just makes you so mad. As the EPA, they had people all around that, all those firemen, and you have Jon Stewart all talking about the firemen today, but they don't go back to realize, why aren't we holding these people accountable? That they lied. They could, much less did they lie about how the towers went down or why the towers went down. They even lied and said that the scene was safe for all these, not only first responders, but all these firemen, all these cops, to get deadly cancer shortly thereafter. So we really should be talking about this in a public forum almost every single day. And it really frustrates me that it's basically been memory hold, and very few people actually care about finding the truth about this whole entire ordeal.
Yeah, I've had people contact us, and they want us to help them try to get money from the fund. And unfortunately, it's just we don't have the resources for that. It's not what we focus on, but we do talk about those people and try to give publicity to them. And one of the things is, people say, oh, 9/11, it happened 23 years ago. It's old news. Let's move on from it. But those people who are having to stop and breathe every step when they go up a flight of stairs, or laying in a bed right now, slowly dying, for them, 9/11 is still continuing to happen. They're the secondary victims of this attack. And the reason that they're sick is not because airplanes went into the towers. It's because the towers came down when they should not have, as all of our evidence has shown. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we submitted a request for correction to NIST on the World Trade Center 7 report. They got a lot of things wrong. They didn't address any of our points. They basically just said they stand by the report. We took them to court over this, and the court ruled that the federal agencies, as long as they meet their statutory requirements, are not obligated to issue scientifically accurate reports, as long as they issue a report. So now we have this thing called the Scientific Integrity Act that we're drafting. We're going to try to take it to Congress. But what does this say about accountability to the people of the United States? That's something so bizarre that they could just say something so bizarre that the reports don't have to be accurate. It's almost like the people have no say now in what happens in their government, and they do not have to answer to us. And especially with scientific reports, I mean, a scientific report could be the difference between life and death for a certain population of people in a town, if there's a company putting out cancer-causing substances or something, or the difference between war and peace. If they say, oh, there's a nuclear signature in this country, they have nuclear weapons or something like that. I'd just like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, like I said earlier, Jon Stewart is one of the biggest voices in the liberal media, and you would think that he would be able to bring attention, and he does bring a little bit, but it's not rectified the situation of all those people just dying of deadly cancer. And once again, if you look, I think you were talking about NIST. NIST is full of crap. They can just issue a report and say, this is what we think happened. And I believe on Tower 7 that they said, obviously, that it was caused by office fires. Yet you had the Mandarin Oriental burn for like 48 hours. We've had multiple buildings burn for much longer that didn't collapse, which were steel structures. So NIST just lied. Was it the University of Alaska, I think, did a study proving that structurally that it's impossible how NIST described it. And if you just look at how it fell into its footprint, just that alone would make you question, how did that happen? Like, why did it fall like that? And then just the way that the Twin Towers fell. And then you can also look at, like I said earlier, Marvin Bush, who was supposedly in charge of the security at the time when the towers fell. And people are like, well, how are they going to be able to go put, thermite or some sort of, accelerant in these towers? Well, first of all, people don't realize on the 93rd floor, there was art students that supposedly lived there. That nobody else lived in this building, but supposedly some random art students had the run of the building when all the offices closed. So there were people operating in that building that I think were maybe working for foreign agencies, maybe working for our country, could have been working for a conglomerate of countries that work together behind the scenes. But it's very possible that these buildings and these elevator shafts that nobody has access to, that were shut down a week before, people were even saying that they couldn't go into work, that they were getting messages. And this is on the week before and the week of, that there's people doing construction work in the towers. And that's the official story. So it's very plausible that maybe Tower 7 was built to come down because it was also housing for not only CIA, FBI, but it was also the control command center for an emergency situation that the mayor would go to. And yet Rudy Giuliani did not go in that building that day. They didn't use that building. So I and this is just speculation, I think that the plan was probably concocted from Tower 7 and that was the plan for that building to go down. And I think even more buildings were supposed to fall down on 9/11.
It's very possible, and it's possible too because they announced it, I believe it was on CNN earlier in the day. And I'm not even talking about the BBC, which was 20 minutes earlier. Then they lose the feed before the building actually goes down. You can see it standing right behind Jane.
Clearly in the background. That's so ridiculous. It's clearly in the background. They say the Solomon Brothers building is down, which is the name for Tower 7. It's just laughing right in our face.
Well, it was an unprecedented event. Even NIST said this, but for some reason the media had all this foresight about this event that had never happened before. So apparently they're psychic now. But even earlier in the day, I think it was CNN had reported that it had already gone down. And this came up in another interview. I'm just going to tell you, NIST's whole story relies on these raging fires in a certain area of the building. They say cause these beams to get hot. Push a girder off its seat, cause this internal collapse, and then the inside goes down and then the outside. But you can look at photos of that area an hour before and there's no fires. They're all burnt out. So if you don't have the raging fires, you don't have the thermal expansion, you don't have this entire event. That's how ridiculous this all is. They have been thoroughly debunked. And so the proper thing is to go, of course, back to the drawing board and come up with a new report that's more plausible. Maybe consider some of the evidence of controlled demolition because it's what happened. But of course, they're not going to do that. So we have to take them to court and all that stuff. Part of the issue, again, I think we've made the case. We do this every day. We've made the case. This was absolutely a controlled demolition here. Part of the issue is public education. That study you cited from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, I think they covered it locally in Alaska. I mean, there might have been a mention here and there from some rogue newspapers or whatnot, but this should be a national scandal, right? And they should at least be trying to rectify why these two, the NIST reports and the University of Alaska Fairbanks have completely different conclusions, but hardly a word. So this is what we go up against. And I know that you have become well known for some very public stunts out there trying to get attention onto various issues. This is kind of how the 9/11 Truth Movement started. People like Luke Rudowski going out there and doing public confrontations with people and stuff like that, got people really excited and paying attention to the issue. I know I've had friends describe it as cringy in the few times that I've ever done it, but I think sometimes cringy is necessary because it wakes people up from their apathy and malaise. So talk about that and the importance of peaceful but very noticeable confrontations.
Well, you're exactly right. That's the complaint that I either get when I confront a politician, and Luke, when he confronted Larry Silverstein, that was great. But yeah, it is cringe because it's hard to watch because you're watching somebody confront somebody and it's awkward. But, you'd also say that Curb Your Enthusiasm, one of the best comedy shows on TV, is a little cringe. Cringe is actually, like you said, it kind of wakes you up from your apathy where you just almost don't care. And then you're watching, and now all of a sudden you care, like what's going to happen, good versus evil. But when we talk about this, is I'm actually planning on September 10th, the day before 9/11. They're having two public meetings in New York. They're not having any meetings on the 11th, which makes sense probably because they're not going to conduct government business. I think they're not, but they're not having any meetings on the 11th. But on the 10th, I believe it's the meeting on general welfare, and there's another meeting on like health and safety. And I'm going to go to both these meetings, and I'm going to exclusively talk about 9/11 and the lies that we were told and the modern day ramifications that are happening now that were affected by, like all of the firemen that are dying of cancer. So I'm going to go there and create another public stunt very shortly. I don't know if it'll get picked up by the mainstream media, probably not, but I do know that my audience and this similar audience will enjoy maybe the cringe content of me calling out the mayor and the city of New York for not giving us the real story when it comes to 9/11, even 23 years later, when you think that we deserve it now more than ever.
Yeah, it's still affecting our world because one thing leads to another. It's like dominoes falling, and I mean, the entire 21st century, we were promised flying cars and all this wonderful stuff. Instead, we got 9/11, the war on terror, and a bunch of just uncertainty and drama that we don't need. So good for you on doing that, and maybe we'll report that when you do it. But I have seen, like I said before, that when you go out and do these public confrontations, most of these public figures, they are surrounded by this spongy membrane of polite chit chat and emails and aides. I mean, you go up to a congressman, you want to show him our book that we wrote. It was a very thin manual on all the evidence, and there's always some aide to jump in front of him and say, "Oh, I'll just take that there." Wouldn't surprise me if there was intelligence assets working in some of these offices, like Mockingbird, but focused on members of Congress, because that the material is going to end up in the trash. So the only way to get through to them is to basically do it publicly, and try to embarrass people, but sometimes it's the only way to get through. And I would like to see more of that, peaceful, so they don't give us some kind of justification,
Obviously peaceful.
Demonize everyone.
That's just real good. If we always want to do this peacefully and semi-respectfully, not that calling them out's not always the most respectful thing, but just no physical, no we don't really want to scare the person. We just want to ask them hard questions that they're not willing to answer.
That's exactly it. And nobody does anything they'd rather not do unless they're afraid of something else. And public scenes, embarrassment is a good tool there. Now, I do want to talk about the media a little bit because this is something, like I see this weird situation now in this country where most of the people that I talk to, even people who aren't involved in stuff, your typical Walmart shopper, they worry about their immediate family. They go to their job, they watch some Netflix, they go to bed. They don't trust the mainstream media. Your typical person out there. They say they're full of lies. But they still go running to it when something happens and seem to obey. But at the same time, more and more people are watching folks like you and other alternative shows and stuff on the internet, getting different kinds of information. And to be honest, I think the only thing, this is my theory, the only thing that is keeping the dinosaur media going is the later generations that are used to getting their news from Tom Brokaw, Dan Rather. And then once that generation cycles out, you're going to have the new people coming up that are used to getting it from the internet, and it's going to be a completely different landscape. What do you think about that theory? Am I way off base, or do I have a point? And will this lead to something better, or will the internet just become more and more controlled like the mainstream media in your view?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, that's obviously that's what's going to happen is that the dinosaur media is going to die. But they're funded by, like, when General Electric owns NBC and all these conglomerates, they're almost too big to fail. And so because they have access to those airwaves, we're always going to get lied to by the mainstream media that has access to the cable networks, to the local networks. So they are always going to have and exist and have a presence, I believe. And there's always going to be people with cognitive dissonance that know the government lies, but they still believe the mainstream media. But it's obvious that Howard Stern used to be so scared of Joe Rogan. Before Joe Rogan was a nobody, he used to make fun of him for podcasting. Now Joe Rogan's got the biggest show. So it's trending towards the internet, and the internet is going to metaphorically kill this dinosaur media. It's probably crushing radio. It's going to be crushing the TV, and it will not be the same. Most people will go to the internet for all of their news. So yeah, that's obvious. But at the same time, you know, it's almost a futile fight if you really want to try to get the official story from the mainstream media. Like, I would love it if they went on Channel 5 and they talked about, NIST, and they talk about how there's anomalies, considering the University of Alaska Fairbanks, did a report, debunking it all. Like you said, I think they picked it up in Alaska. Could you imagine if they did that on the CBS Nightly News or one of these shows? They'll never do that. They will never, ever do that. And sadly, it would get a lot of views. It would get a lot of clicks. Me, as a person that, knows how the internet works, it would actually be good TV, but they would never do it
Yeah.
because they don't care about making good TV. They don't care about actually giving us information that people would run to it. 9/11 truth for me was something that, hell, I don't like to read. I mean, I do read stuff. I have to read stuff every day. But, I would read for hours and hours about 9/11. I would go online and watch hours and hours of stuff because I was motivated, because I want to know the truth. So we have to be able to motivate them. And that's what I've noticed too with my content. And I try to use humor to try to wake people up, but you can't wake somebody up that doesn't want to be awake. That's the problem. You can give them all the information, you can give them all the context clues of why this story doesn't make sense and all the holes in the official story. And they just don't want to be awake because they're, like you said, they're the Walmart shopper. No offense to Walmart, but it's not their problem. It doesn't affect them anymore. And they're worried about bigger and more important things in their lives. So I don't know how we motivate them, but the mainstream media is not going to do it. And luckily, we do have this trend towards independent content creators that people are actually watching, like TikTok, even though it's owned by China, or Instagram, or Twitter, or YouTube. Now people are finding the content that they want to watch. We just need more people, I guess, looking for this alternative media, I guess you'd call it.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta have to make the mainstream media irrelevant, which we have done to a large extent over the years, and I consider that sort of 9/11 truth's legacy. If we accomplish nothing else, at least we've gotten people questioning other narratives. Remember they lied to you about Building 7. What else are they lying to you about? And that's a good thing. I'm very happy about that. I want us to do more, though. I believe that someday, I'm the optimist, people make fun of me, but I think that we will have an acknowledgement of this. I'm just hoping a lot of devastation doesn't happen beforehand.
Well, let me tell you, this is my one hope that I have, and this couldn't be. I'm just speculating this, but I am friends with Laura Trump. I'm lucky to call her a friend. And Donald Trump's not perfect. I said this earlier, but I like Donald Trump. But on the day of the attack, he got interviewed. I forget by which news source, but he even said that he thought for those buildings, they were built so strong when they originally bombed him in '93. He went and looked at the columns. He said, the building was fine, and that they would need multiple bombs to take down the towers. And he speculated on the day of the attack that there was bombs in those towers. So I think our main Hail Mary is that if Donald Trump becomes president, maybe somebody can convince him to actually look into this. And if he did, he would realize that, hey, this is all a lie. And if he exposed that, it would wake up so many people. It would make our country so much of a better place because people would realize that we were lied to. And I think that a lot of the angst that the conspiracy community has, and then a lot of the knowledge that people that aren't involved with it, they would get new knowledge. It would just make the world a better place. But unless Donald Trump does that, which the CIA and FBI, I don't think they ever would, I don't know how we actually ever get the official story to change, or even the 28 pages that are redacted from the 9/11 Commission report that supposedly outlines Saudi Arabia's involvement. So I don't know. It's an uphill battle, but if anybody could do it, it's going to have to be a guy like Trump, or it needs to be like somebody that's willing to go against the system to give us the real information. Because listen, what is it? Dick Cheney and George Bush did those interviews behind closed doors. I mean, who knows what they said in those interviews? Who knows if they even did those interviews? But like, there's the 9/11 Commission report is a lie. It's such a lie, and it's so easy to figure that out. So we just need somebody to go through it. And maybe when Trump says, because he's friends with RFK, that he's going to release the JFK files. If he does that, then the 9/11 files should be in lockstep with the JFK files, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I love that. Bush and Cheney, they can't testify alone. They have to testify together. It's like the president needs a babysitter. And then afterwards, he goes and talks to the press and he's like, yeah, I'm glad I did it. You know, I mean, it felt good. Like he just went out and cleaned the basement or something he'd been meaning to do for years. You know, instead of talking about.
Well, the people, sorry to cut you off, the people watching this also need to look up Norman Mineta. Norman Mineta even testified that Dick Cheney was being warned by some sort of military figure. Mm-hmm. The military figure looked nervous, like the plane's getting, it's 100 miles, 20 miles, or whatever the distance was. And that the Norman Mineta, this is the transportation secretary, gay Pete Buttigieg. This is the Pete Buttigieg of 2001. No offense to Pete. I'm just saying the guy now, Mayor Pete, guy that chest feeds his baby. The transportation secretary at the time was in the war room with Dick Cheney, and Dick Cheney was being warned, do the plans change? Do the plans change? Are we changing the plans? And Dick Cheney looks at him very frustrated. And this is Norman Mineta saying this thing. Did I tell you the plans have changed? Did I tell you the plans have changed? And so it's just frustrating. All of that is a dog whistle saying they could have scrambled the NORAD jets. They could have shot this down, but they didn't want them to shoot it down. So Dick Cheney is the one that I think is even probably the architect of this, or one of the main figures in who benefited from it too. When you look at Halliburton, you look at all these stocks they had in these military industrial complex companies that just got to go to Afghanistan and build army bases and Burger Kings and, just wasted trillions of dollars to kill Muslim people that had nothing to do with it. There's Muslim people that had nothing to do with it. Even they admitted that we drone striked weddings, we drone striked funerals. For what? To people that didn't even do the terror attack on 9/11. So the war on terror was a big scam, and 9/11 was a catalyst that made it okay for us to go and invade other countries. And it makes me sick that, the 3,000 people that died on 9/11 and then the countless of other people that got cancer. But we can't forget about the hundreds of thousands and even millions of people that died in the Middle East because of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you go and drone strike a wedding, kill some innocent people. Somebody survives it. Maybe they lose their mother, their father, or whatever. They're going to be a little pissed off, you think. And so you create more hostility towards this country, which I think to the military industrial complex is A-okay, because we get some kind of conflict going, we make more money. And then, my generation, I was in college when September 11th happened. And it's like my generation was the one that went out and fought those wars. I didn't go to war, but I knew a lot of people that did. They come home killed by or not killed, but, maimed by some roadside bomb. And now they can't cut their own steak meat when they go out to the restaurant. Their girlfriend has to do it for them, or they're in a wheelchair. They lost their legs, half their face is blown off. Terrible stuff. And they're still living with that. They're going to live with that for the rest of their lives. So my generation deserves some explanations about September 11th and about some of the decisions that were made afterwards. And it's so funny that after September 11th, all we heard was Osama bin Laden. And then once we get refocused on Iraq, Bush gets asked about Osama bin Laden. He's like, oh, I don't even think about him anymore. Supposedly this guy that we hadn't caught at that point that was still putting out these videos to taunt the United States and whatnot, some suspicion.
And the CIA got exposed. They got exposed. You can look this up, that some of those beheading videos that we saw were fake. So, they obviously lied with a lot of the information that we're getting about Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And when you talk about soldiers that died, I think one of the biggest names that people just forget is a guy by the name of Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman was a starting safety with the Arizona Cardinals, had a multi-million-dollar contract with the NFL, was a star player in the prime of his career, and decided after 9/11 that he was motivated to go in the war on terror, and he was killed by friendly fire. And when you look into the Pat Tillman story, his wife said that he was writing her letters saying that he didn't understand the clear agenda of why they were there, and that he was starting to get disenfranchised with their, whole agenda in the Middle East, and he didn't think it made sense. And this guy would, if he would have came back from the Middle East in one piece, he would have been the most famous American. They couldn't have that. They couldn't have an NFL superstar coming back and saying that the war in the Middle East was all a lie, and we were had no clear agenda, and we were just basically there killing people for nothing, not to protect America, but basically to protect maybe the Afghani poppy fields that all the Afghanistan Taliban burned down once we left. I mean, we facilitated the heroin trade in Afghanistan. And you're like wondering, why would Joe Biden just leave Afghanistan? Well, maybe now because our country's being flooded by cheap fentanyl, so we don't even need poppy seeds now that we have synthetic heroin, aka fentanyl. So it just doesn't make sense. I believe that Afghanistan was a key asset because of the poppy fields and multiple other reasons, and just a strategic thing in the Middle East to try to demoralize the Muslim populations that they thought were a threat. And it was all just a psychological operation in order to make us hate one another and to hate people that were brown. And that's what was really sad too. After 9/11, you'd hear about just a nice guy at a gas station in, like, I forget, maybe South Carolina, I forget which city, maybe Arkansas, was shot and killed because some guy was radicalized to go kill a guy because he's brown. And that's all. I mean, that guy's obviously an idiot for doing that, but I also blame the media too for radicalizing us against a whole group of people. I mean, now they're trying to say that we're anti-racism. You were allowed to publicly be racist in the early 2000s against Muslim people. See something, say something. You were allowed to just tell on people and say, oh, I think that Muslim's a bomb or a terrorist. You should investigate him. And people were really calling in and making these threats or whatever you want to call it. They were telling on people because of their color of their skin. So they created probably the most racist incident we've ever had against Muslim people. For me, I just hate that because I'm not a racist. I make racial jokes. I make fun of stereotypes all the time, but I love Jewish people. I love Muslim people. I love Christian people. I do love black people, white people. I don't want to just, demoralize or hate somebody because they're different from me, but that's what they did. They created a whole enemy in a country like 7,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away that we all should have been afraid of, that we could all die at any minute from a terror attack. It's really scary how they can just use fear. I call it trauma-based mind control to control the population, and it worked incredibly well for them.
Yeah, and it keeps on happening. I like to think we're making some kind of dent here. And, part of the issue is you got to have young people. I'm getting older. A lot of our ranks are getting older with this. Of course, we're going to keep on going, but we need to keep on getting young people involved and not getting focused on wedge issues of no consequence. You see a lot of energy on the internet, but for instance, I watched a video, and I mean, you could say, what's wrong with me watching this, but a video of a kid, talking about a box of Captain Crunch for 30 minutes, and so if someone's watching this, young person right now, saying, oh, 9/11, I was a fetus when that happened. Why should I care about this? Why should I get involved in 9/11 truth and question these issues, put my energy into that? And our last few minutes here, what do you have to say to them? What do you want them to take away as a message from this interview right now?
Well, the message that I would want to try to leave them with, however, let me see if I can say that again, guys. The message that I want to leave everybody that's watching this with, especially young people, is that if we don't call this out, they're going to do it again. And they are doing it again. They did it with the pandemic. They did it with a lot of other stuff where they use trauma-based mind control to scare people into hating one another and to go fight a war that was meaningless and spend trillions of your tax dollars to basically kill people. So this is very important. This is all built on a lie. 9/11, if you just look a millimeter below the surface, you can see that the story doesn't make sense. And even the official story that they tell us, we should hold those people responsible, accountable, because they let this happen. Even the official stories, like oopsie poopsie. But George Bush will never be held accountable. So we need young people to watch this and look at this information and just spend an hour of your day. I know that's hard to ask because we have, very short attention spans. But the official narrative of 9/11, go look at Tower 7. Look how that building fell. Go watch how those buildings and how those planes entered, and just look at the VMR velocity maximum rate for these planes, going 500 miles an hour at low speed, crashing into these buildings by pilots that weren't even trained to fly. They didn't even the official story is that when they were in the flight school, that the flight instructor said, "No, we don't even care about learning how to land that plane." I don't think that they knew how to fly those planes. I believe they were patsies, and there's much more to the story. So just please look into it. It does not pass the smell test. And I get it. You're a young person. You got your life. You got a whole litany of other issues that you're more focused on. But 9/11 was the worst tragedy that I ever saw in my entire life. 10 billion times worse than January 6th. I don't believe that January 6th was anywhere close to 9/11. It was not. And sadly, 9/11 actually brought this country together in a weird way. And because of that, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't do something like this again. And then also, I need you to look up Operation Northwoods, which was a plan by the CIA that they actually, to create a conflict with Cuba, they were going to hijack a plane and make it look like Cuba hijacked a plane, even though we were going to hijack it ourselves and do a false flag attack, crashing into buildings in Miami to start start a war with Cuba. So look up Operation Northwoods. Look that they already had this plan in place, and that JFK said no, and then ended up dying shortly thereafter. Which that's kind of a weird coincidence. So just please, I beg you, just do a little bit of research into this. I promise you, you will realize that they are lying to us.
Alex Stein, thank you so much for joining us here on the 24th Hour.